Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. With me on this episode of Writers at Work is Zorana Pringle, author of The Creative Choice, the science of making decisions to turn ideas into action. Zorana is a senior research scientist at the Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence, where she currently serves as the director of the Creativity and Emotions Lab. She recently joined me at a live Writers at Work event in New Haven, and I wanted you to have an opportunity to hear her views on writing and creativity, and I had a few questions for her that I didn't get to ask her on that night. As a writer, Zorana is a regular contributor to Psychology Today and Creativity Post. With more than 25 years as a scientist studying creativity, she brings insight into the nature of the creative process, from the first decision to engage with new ideas to its culmination in creative performance and product. Her work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, ArtNet, U.S. News, Education Week, Science Daily, and other publications. Of the Creativity Choice, one reviewer wrote, "I've never read a clearer, more thoroughly researched, or more thoughtful framework for how we can all nurture creativity as a skill set. In the age of AI, when the last thing that will set humanity apart from machines is our creativity, I cannot think of a timelier moment for this book." With that in mind, let me say, Zorana Pringle, welcome to Writers at Work.
Thank you for having me.
Zorana, I want to talk to you about your book and how you chose to write it. But first, can we talk about creativity? Is it safe to say that creativity isn't an inherent trait, that one can learn to be creative?
It is very much so. Creativity is something that we can define, contrary to popular opinion, as something that is in the same time original and effective. And it is something that can be learned with practice and with exploration.
You know, when I look back at my childhood, which was a very long time ago, I was identified as creative. But I imagine there were at least some creative children who were already overlooked and discouraged. Do you meet people like that who tell you that they were never encouraged to be creative as children?
Certainly, actually, there is a colleague of mine, Ron Bagetto, who has studied this, and he has found something that he termed creative mortification. It
Ah,
is a phenomenon that harsh criticism, even a single instance of harsh criticism, can make people become completely unwilling to engage in something creative again. And it is much more likely to happen with younger children who have not yet developed ways of coping with disappointments and criticism that might not be very well intended.
yes. I would think that if, and I'm making an assumption here that back in my childhood, people were a little bit less understanding about the creative process than they are today. But people may have been well-intentioned when they said to somebody, "You're not creative. Put your attention elsewhere."
You're right. They might be, especially if they are seeing other potential and want to direct children in a particular way. Um, but the issue comes to how you are doing that, and that may be really the big problem. Also, when adults interact with children and give them messages that they might not be creative, they are usually focused very narrowly on one kind of creativity, and children end up generalizing it across the board.
Hmm.
This is particularly the case when we are talking about artistic areas. So somebody might not be artistically inclined, or they do not have interest in it, did not invest time in it, and end up being discouraged from that area, while in the same time there are cultural messages that tell us that creativity is being artistic. Creativity is in artistic areas, writing, perhaps design, perhaps something that is more oriented towards, well, maybe marketing or advertising, but always with that angle of artistry, and equating creativity with artistic endeavors can have really unfortunate consequences.
So people who have been dissuaded from being creative can actually catch up at some point.
Oh, yes, certainly people can catch up. Um, it is possible to learn relevant skills, relevant practices, and habits of mind or mindsets at different points in life. It's not that once you have an experience in childhood, you are scarred for life. Um, it is something that can happen at different points in life, but it oftentimes doesn't, because people develop ways of thinking early on that get perpetuated by choices we make. So when you have a mindset of, well, I am not creative, I don't have the potential of being creative, then you don't take opportunities that might enable you to develop some skills, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm thinking of something you mentioned a minute or so ago, someone who is rejected during a creative endeavor and decides to withdraw. Um, I imagine that we both know a number of writers who've done this.
There are certainly stories we can think of, writers who have done it. And writing is a great example of, I mean, it certainly happens in other areas, but in writing, you are going to get rejections. You
Yes.
are going to get no's, and sometimes very interesting rejections. I certainly found rejections of my book proposal very interesting. And the what happens usually in writing is that these rejections come a little bit later in life, when hopefully we are better equipped to deal with them. Does not matter, they don't, it does not mean that they don't hurt and that they are not challenging to deal with and not stop us in our tracks. But hopefully, we have strategies to deal with them.
You know, there was a sentence in your book that jumped out at me very early on, and it was a little bit heartbreaking, this sentence. You state, if not developed, every creative idea remains locked in the realm of fantasy. And I just thought about people who have this creative idea and may lack the tools or the initiative or the support team to unlock those realms of so how does one learn to unlock creativity?
I actually would not use the word unlock, and because of what it implies. It implies that the potential is already there. We are, for the lack of better terms, born with it. It's already preformed somewhere within us, and we just have to unlock it.
See,
So I would look for different ways of describing it, more towards building and developing potential.
mm,
And writing is a great example. Anybody who has ever written has can look back and see the developmental trajectory. and not every writer has been encouraged from very early on as being a great writer or told that they were a great writer. They had an interest, they have an inkling, but they also could see major changes. I know as I started writing that I developed different skills. My writing started in technical scientific writing, and then I developed a new interest in scientific communication and wanted to communicate more towards the general public. And each of these kinds of writing are different in nature and have their own trajectories. And of course, I now look back at my early writing and find it a bit lacking, and that is a common experience. So it's a good example of that we can apply to creativity more generally. It is something that develops with time and with lot of doing.
Do you have a definition of creativity that you use?
I use what creativity researchers call the standard definition of creativity. And it says that it is something that is in the same time original and effective. And that originality, sometimes I heard people say, well, nothing in the world is truly original, that it has never been in any shape or form thought by anybody in history. And I might even agree with that. But originality is really along a continuum. It is something that can be personal, a new insight or a new way of thinking that helps in the learning process for you as a person. It can be something on a small scale with friends and family, or it can be something that is on the professional level where you are writing new books or writing scientific research, or depending on the domain of work, producing other kinds of outcomes that are solving a problem or are effective in some way of having an influence on its audience.
A creative act must be shared.
That is a great question. And I am of two minds. There is a great debate in creativity studies whether it must be shared. And I don't necessarily think it must be shared. I think that the key word there is an act. So creativity is an act of not just thinking something, but doing something. Now, if we share it, if we make the choice of sharing it, it can then have an effect or an influence on others, which I think it's a little bit different. But you have really stumbled on a great area of debate in our professional field of study.
I was actually just looking at the dictionary definition of creativity. Um, and it only applies putting um, putting create the creative act into production in the artistic realm.
Yes, and I think because of that definition in the dictionary and that definition in our culture, we get these messages of equating creativity with artistic areas, but that does not have to be so. And maybe a dictionary could get a revised definition.
So at Yale, you serve as the director of the Creativity and Emotions Lab. What is the relationship between creativity and emotion?
That's my favorite topic. Usually, I get asked the question, what emotions are good for creativity and what emotions are detrimental? And that question does not really have an answer because it turns out that it is not so much what exactly you are feeling any particular moment, it is what you do with those feelings. And that seems very abstract and strange about because of how we think about emotions. And we tend to think about emotions as something based on our experience, as something that happens to us. And we talk about triggers. And think of the image of a trigger. It happens, it is pulled, and there's an immediate and quick reaction. But underneath, in the in the development of an emotion, there are other influences. There are influences on which aspects of situations we are paying attention to, how we interpret the meaning of a particular situation, and how we react. And all of that really determines our experience. Once we know more about how emotions function, then it turns out that we have some agency in relation to our emotions and can put them to use in the service of our creative work.
So, if the emotion is intrinsic to the creativity, I'll use the word project. Okay, it's probably not correct, but the creative project, an emotion is essential to it. Uh, there could be an emotion that is outside the project itself that could be detrimental, no?
Yes, certainly. There are emotions can happen in that are relevant to the project. I think the word project is a very good placeholder here. Um, that could be relevant to the project, and those that are not, and that can directly interfere with our work because they can become overwhelming or just distracting. And uh, emotions can be inspirational in the creative process, and we can harness different kinds of emotion as essentially fuel, to use a metaphor. To give you an example, I have conducted interviews, done research with this was a group of creative individuals in what is usually called creative industries. So in fiction and nonfiction writing, visual arts, music composition, choreography. So very diverse areas under the creative industries umbrella. And I have asked them to describe the emotional side of their creative work, and it turns out that it looks very differently at different times. In those times of inspiration, there is a great diversity that goes from joy and excitement and love to pain and anxiety and beyond. So there is a lot of different kinds of emotions that end up being put to use and expressed through the work itself.
Right.
And these artists are really describing uh, how they notice emotions in themselves or in the world around them, and then take them as bits that become inspiration.
Do you listen to music when you write?
I personally do not listen to music while I write because I find music exceptionally distracting.
No.
Um, I and I find it really interesting how people react to music differently. I find music grabbing my attention to such a point that I cannot have it in the background. It takes my emotions, it grabs my emotions, it grabs my thinking, and it takes it in its own direction. And I don't find it helpful, but I have found that lots of people do find it helpful.
Yeah, the reason I ask is it was the example that came to mind for me about an emotion being intrinsic to the work versus an emotion that motivates the work or sparks the work.
Hmm.
Um, and I find, and perhaps I'm overly sensitive to this, is that a lot of people will reference music that they were listening to when they were writing a certain piece.
Hmm.
And the emotion is just not on the, and I perceive that they were inspired by the music that they were listening to. It motivated them, it energized them, but they were not capable of getting that emotion and energy onto the page to translate it to the reader.
Hmm. Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think the distinction between emotions that are intrinsic to work and that are incidental is a really important one. To give you an example that I am fascinated by, and it comes back to this what emotions might be helpful and what might not be helpful in the creative process. Let's take one emotion, frustration, just an unexpected one, perhaps.
Okay.
So, frustration can be really inspirational and in for many entrepreneurs, for instance, inspiration became that spark that got them on a particular path, that gave them a particular idea, seeing that something is essentially frustrating, does not work in a way that is convenient, does not work in a way that, well, it should, ends up triggering that, hey, but something should be done about it, and why not me doing something about it? On the other hand, you have so that emotion of frustration is coming from the outside of what you are doing immediately, but frustration can also come from your evaluation of how the project is going. You are
Right.
frustrated because you are not making progress. Now, that is going to often get us into spirals of worry that it's not going well, and then you start being anxious about not doing well, and that prevents you from re-engaging, seeing different perspectives of restarting if you are experiencing a block.
I don't imagine being frustrated would be helpful in writing about frustration.
Um, that is a great thought. I have actually never thought of it. I think it might be if you are writing about frustration as a psychologist,
Okay.
because you might be able to access what that experience is like, or even if you are trying to communicate the inside of that emotion, it might be helpful. But I never thought about writing about frustration itself. So you caught me there.
No. So I've been ever since you appeared at our live Writers at Work event. I've been thinking about the concept of emotional blindness, which I had never heard about or thought much about. Because as I was looking into um, your bio as the director of creativity and emotions, I began to think, is there such a thing as an utter lack of emotion? And I came
Mm.
upon this term, alexithymia. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yes,
Alexithymia. Yeah.
yes.
Have you studied that?
I have not studied that. I have not studied that personally, but I have studied something that is its opposite.
Ah,
Um, and alexithymia is considered to be either as a psychological disorder in itself or something that is part of a psychological disorder. And I don't tend to be on that side of research. But in a way, emotional intelligence is its opposite. It is an ability to perceive emotions with nuance and with relative accuracy, an ability to recognize how different emotions could be used, understand the causes and consequences, typical consequences of different emotions, and being able to manage the emotions towards certain goals. So kind of nudge the course of emotion so that it does not become overwhelming.
we're finally going to get to your book, Zorana.
Oh,
So,
let's.
uh, uh, I did express this to you earlier. Um, it's not pop psychology. It's serious work of serious scholarship. But your writing is so accessible and so intimate from the first pages. And I think I told you this, that I suspect that you could attract a mainstream readership.
Thank you. That was my intention. It was my intention to say there are these misconceptions we have about creativity, and we can communicate better about what we have learned about the creative process from accumulated scholarship. And I wanted to put it in terms that are accessible and engaging.
Yeah. Tell us about your conversation with your editors about who the target audience would be.
Uh, I I found the conversation about the target audience really interesting in a meta level. It is something that everybody wanted to discuss, but I was rather ambivalent about it because I could identify the narrow audience, which seems to be the correct way of identifying your audience for a publisher, because a publisher is working within a particular a particular genre, and my book was a psychology slash business book. So what I in a way perceived as the kind of answer that was a good answer is that the book is primarily aimed at those who aim to develop creativity in themselves and in others, such as leaders and those who work in consulting and coaching. And that is true, but I very much agree with you that I wanted and that I aimed at a broader audience, an audience of anybody who might be interested or curious about the topic of creativity, even if they do not really know exactly whether they themselves are or could be creative, but are open to exploring it.
You know, uh, the cover is very appealing. The cover that your publisher gave to your book, which our listeners can find very easily online, um, suggests an outreach to a mainstream audience. I won't try to describe it in detail, but it looks like a growing plant that at its apex suddenly has a starburst. Um, And I think that's a very clever interpretation of bursting into the creative process.
I like how you have seen a starburst. I have seen a dandelion.
Ah, yes, 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 that's
Um,
better. That's better.
but I think that we don't have to limit ourselves to a single interpretation. That is the beauty of it. I cannot take real credit for the cover because I did not take part in designing it. Beyond curating a list of a set of covers that I found appealing of similar books or books that are using science to translate to communicate to the general audience, to the mainstream audience. And I wanted to communicate certain things. I wanted to communicate the idea of growth and the idea of change and something that has a process to it. And I think that the designers were really successful at it.
Yes, it seems to me like they translated your ideas into a visual form rather thoroughly. So, as a writer, um, are you thinking about how do I reach an academic audience and a commercial audience at the same time?
Actually, I am not. I am thinking to reaching the mainstream audience. Academic audience is a very different group, and I have written and edited academic books, and they are more technical in nature. And they do not like having individual stories. They do not like having a personal touch. So this is not a book that is aimed at the academic audience.
Let's see. One final question. You've been studying creativity for about a quarter century. What do you tell writers who want to tap into their creativity to get started or to improve?
I tell them to start. It Once you get started, you start learning and you start developing. And I would like to tell people get feedback. And when you get feedback, you will want to tell the feedback givers that they are wrong. But before you say that, take a breath and consider where they are coming from. As I had a book proposal and I was starting on the journey, learned much from my editors. Learned that certain topics that I did not intend to cover would be of great interest, and subsequently got confirmation of that from readers. And the book has really grown from assorted feedback. I give great thanks and great credit to the editors.
So, the most simple definition of what is a writer, which would be a writer is someone who writes, would be a good way to get started.
Yes, writer is somebody who writes, and writer becomes a better writer through engaging with others.
My guest on Writers at Work is Zorana Pringle, a senior research scientist at the Yale University Center for Emotional Intelligence and author of The Creativity Choice, The Science of Making Decisions to Turn Ideas into Action. Zorana, thank you for joining me on Writers at Work.
Thank you, Jim, very much.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.